So first off, to AUSA and General Ham, to all of you who put this on, thank you very much. It's always a first-class event, but it really is critical also. I mean, we need this now where we can connect our operational requirements to industry and our great defense capabilities to bring something to a soldier that will be needed on a modern battlefield, and that is truly important. I also want to thank Gary and Doug and all of you that took time out of your busy schedules to come be with us today. It certainly makes the event more worthwhile and certainly more meaningful. We now, more than ever before, have this symbiotic relationship with our soldiers on the ground. We are, I wanted to stand up here and say, hi, I'm Bill Gayler. I've been a maneuver soldier for 31 years because aviation is maneuver. We are not our separate and distinct warfighting function. We are part of the movement and maneuver warfighting function. You cannot take one away from the other, and we need to remember that. And I'll tell you, when we think, too, about what the next fight is going to look like, potentially, you kind of need to understand the why of what it is we're doing inside of TRADOC and inside of the Army. The why is because of that operational environment Gary kind of described, with the need to integrate continually rather than just synchronize the inclusion of EW and cyber, this notion of a more sophisticated adversary that potentially becomes enemy that we have to deal with. So the why, when we look at multi-domain operations that we try to improve, is because of standoff. I mean, if you just imagine any kind of theater right now where we have to no longer a forward-based force, we have to gain access, build combat power, and operate. That's operational maneuver all the way to tactical maneuver, and to some extent strategic. So we have a challenge of standoff potentially that you have to fight through. And that standoff is enabled by things that are integrated, like air defense networks and fires complexes and even political and diplomatic and economic interrelationships that give us standoff or deny us ready access. That is kind of the why when we start to assess multi-domain operations and what it is we have to accomplish. So there's been a lot of study done into the multi-domain operations, and the recently published 1.5, does a very good job of describing, hey, what is the central theme? One, we will compete continually. And that need to compete is to shape and prevent conflict, deter. But if that deterrence were to fail, now you must prevail. And you would have to prevail by means of penetrating those integrated things, disintegrating those integrated things, not disintegrate, dis-integrate those integrated complex in order to exploit to achieve a strategic objective. Now, that sounds kind of big, broad brush, but when you think, how do you develop a force that has the capability to penetrate and disintegrate? That drives us to certainly most frequently a modernization strategy. People think immediately, whoa, that's a material thing we have to solve. It is to a degree. But I would argue, the value of TRADOC is to do the constant kind of assessment of the doctrine, the organizational, the training, the leader development, all of those other things that are not material that you may have the opportunity to solve some of that problem without having to pursue a material solution. And I would tell you that is part of the greatest value of TRADOC, is that constant assessment and that constant change to improve and bring capability. Some of the areas that we're looking right now, and I will talk material here in a second, I promise, but we do look very heavily at our doctrine. You know, the Army spent a great deal of time and effort to incorporate into our 3.0 how we as an Army think we will fight on this future battlefield. Every one of the Center of Excellence CGs and their DOTs, their Director of Training and Doctrine, are rapidly rewriting and synchronizing subordinate doctrinal manuals to 3.0 to account for how we think we will fight. We also have to look at organizational design. This one's hard because this is something you have to compete in a TAA at the Army level. This is people, this is spaces. But you have to do the hard work to say, hey, maybe after study, our echelons above division, our corps, need to have a combat capability, a formation that can shape an operation for a subordinate division. Maybe our divisions, echelons above brigade, have to have some capability. Now, when you look at aviation, when we look to say, hey, how would we change? I would tell you the core capability of aviation doesn't change. We find stuff, we kill stuff, and we move stuff. That's about as simply as we can put it. But the environment in which we do that changes and will change. There is certainly an argument for a need to have reconnaissance and security capabilities at the division and corps level to shape a fight on a modern battlefield. When that deterrence fails and we gain access, build combat power, move from operational to tactical maneuver, the operation of reconnaissance and security is critical. To fight for combat information to aid a commander in making decisions on a battlefield. It's not a platform. It's not something that you assign a task to an ISR thing and it builds that combat information for a commander. It's a component of it, but doesn't necessarily replace it. So we know that we have to look at how we're going to adjust structure to potentially bring that capability back. When we look at our cabs right now, we have a modular combat aviation brigade. They all look alike, right? They might not need to. Maybe cabs need to be tailored to the role and mission of the division in which they support. Now, modular cabs made perfect sense during an R4 Gen fourth generation model when we had extended operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we had to constantly get the same capability and sustain it for over a decade. It made sense. But if you look at the next fight, does it make sense? Maybe, maybe not. And we've got that homework to do. When we look at how we train right now, there is significant differences in what we must be skilled at in a future fight over what we are skilled at today. When we know we have threat systems that drive us lower or deny something to us, we have to train to defeat that. That is totally different than what we're doing in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria with an lesser sophisticated air defense capabilities and an enemy, though very challenging and a tough separate set, it's different. So we have to change how we train to ensure that our aviation forces are prepared for that next fight. And that includes our combat training centers, that includes home station training, and that includes everything from simulations to live, et cetera. So there's a great deal of work going into that as well. The third area that I'll talk other than materiel is frankly in sustainment. You know, when you envision this next potential fight, are we organized correctly to sustain that fight in a very expeditionary manner? And I think we are doing a good deal of assessment to say, maybe not. We might have to make some changes. We have to lean ourselves out, and we have to design things in a material solution that enable you to be more expeditionary. Now, told you I would talk some material stuff, and I am. So when I talked the standoff and the challenge that brings, it ought to kind of allow you to see the context of why it is we are pursuing what we are pursuing. I do think, and we all believe very firmly, that where we have aviation priorities are pretty well placed. Because when you think of that modern battlefield, imagine that requirement to detect something. That's to sense it and to see it. So you detect it first. Then you have to be able to identify it. Then you have to locate it to a targetable fidelity. Then you have to report it, share with the other members on the battlefield in order to target it, in order to kill it. So when you describe the detecting, identifying, locating, reporting, sharing, targeting, and killing, that's more than just aviation. So that's why, I believe firmly, and the Army's priorities are very well aligned to solve those problems. I said in a couple of separate forums, the number one modernization program for U.S. Army aviation is long-range precision fires. Because to enable us to maneuver out of contact requires fires, responsive fires. So we're very interested in long-range fires. But long-range fires without the ability to find it, sense it, see it, and locate it does us no good. How do you target something you don't even know what it is or where it is? And if you find it and you can shoot it, but the sensor can't talk to the shooter because the network doesn't allow them, that does you no good either. So that's why I say the genius of the CFT priorities is that they are all interrelated and equally important. So it's the synergy of finding it, locating it, sharing it, targeting and killing it that matter. That's why, and then having the maneuver, mobility, firepower, and protection of next generation combat vehicle to exploit it. So when you look at the National Defense Strategy, when you look at MDO 1.5, where it talks one deterrence fails, you penetrate, disintegrate, exploit, and then when you see the requirements on the battlefield to detect, identify, locate, share, target, kill, all of those things are connected. So long-range fires, critical. Next generation combat vehicle, critical. Future vertical lift, critical. Network, critical. Air missile defense, critical. Soldier lethality, absolutely critical. That synergy, that capability is the relationship of all of them. That is greater than the sum of its parts. So having fires without a network, having a network without FVL, having a next generation combat vehicle without air missile defense is not the capability that it could be. It takes all of them. That's the genius of the CFT priorities, in my personal opinion. And we all need to stay very focused on that. I think the Army has done a very good job of prioritizing and holding firm on their priorities, even at the expense of things that don't fall into those priorities but are important also. That's the challenge we're in. Now, for aviation, we will always prioritize lethality and protection improvements. Always. We have to, because we have to stay ahead of technology changes on the battlefield to enable us to maintain overmatch. And an enemy will not sit by idly and allow us to maintain that overmatch. So it's a constant challenge. When we look at our capability to get in, to fight for combat information in reconnaissance and security, in and out of contact with an enemy force, that requires us to have an armed reconnaissance aircraft that has some unique capabilities defined in reach, protection, lethality, that have speed, range, and endurance to stay on and fight for extended periods of time in an expeditionary fashion, but that are also small enough, maneuverable enough to avoid detection, or at least minimize targetable detection. That's critical to us as an Army, not just for aviation. We also have a requirement to move a lot of troops and equipment over extended distances. When you have an adversary that has standoff, that can reach out and touch you with certain capabilities, you need to be able to operate outside of that threat range, but with the speed to respond the same as we do today. We need that long-range assault aircraft. And we need it not only for capability, but when you saw the Big Five that my good friend Gary put up, remember when those came on to the active duty scene or to the Army scene in the 80s? How old are they now? We will have significant investment in recapitalization and that are going to, we know when that's going to happen. And we know we have to introduce improved capability before we have to pay money to just recapitalize what we already have. So that long-range assault aircraft is critical. When we look at an advanced unmanned aerial systems, that is also critical. How we team today is different than how we will need to team in the future. We need capabilities that can sense and see more than just full motion video. You have to be able to sense and see on the electromagnetic spectrum and identify and geolocate. That's potentially unmanned systems that are teamed with manned systems that can target and kill it instantly. We need unmanned capabilities that can swarm, that can clutter, that can defeat an integrated air defense system, that aid us in defeating that integrated air defense system. That means low observable. That means more payload-centric, not platform-centric. That is important. And the notion of a modular open system architecture, which to most people in this room, I'll say it this way, that means one backbone on a platform. Do not bring us a new thing that can't automatically integrate into that backbone, because we're not going to buy 3 different backbones and have to constantly pay to improve capabilities. We cannot do that. We have to make it where we test it before it goes on the aircraft into a lab. It works, we'll compete it, and when the one we buy, we just stick on the aircraft and go. We don't have to do more non-recurring developmental costs and integration testing, and we don't have time for that. We need capability, and we need capability to come at the speed of technological change, which we do not currently do. So, okay, so I tried to keep that somewhat short so that I can answer some questions, but I will put a plug. We're going to segue into some panels here in a few minutes. And I think the panels generally are the true value to have a dialogue and answer questions. So please challenge the panels. You got 4 very good panels with very good moderators with quality participants that are here at your disposal. So thank you for your time. Yep, an aviator with glasses too. Gary, I'm with you. What's the current state of aviation, Army aviation and SOF aviation's relationship? This seems always to be a fragile relationship with highly perishable TTPs. So, thank you for that question. I would tell you the relationship, 1, has always been strong, but 2 is probably stronger now than ever before. And what I mean by that is, so the SOF community certainly realizes that as goes Army aviation, so goes SOF, because they get people and platforms generally initially from Army aviation. They then maybe modify a few things or whatever, but the people they get certainly come from Army aviation. So to ensure that Army aviation and SOF are well linked in training and TTPs and technologies, we integrate early and we are very synchronized. We just completed a couple of live tests against some at an area that allowed us to test some things we don't normally get to test, put mildly. And we integrated 160th aviators and crew members with conventional Army aviators to run baseline tests to validate some procedures. And the sharing right now is phenomenal. We share often also in developmental work. I think you have to, 1, SOF has an ability to bring capability quicker in some cases, but I do think the Army has a very good mechanism to stay linked with it, and if it also applies to the rest of the Army, taking advantage of that speed and acceleration and, kind of sharing in the cost burden of that, actually absorbing it. It's probably a better way of putting it. But we're good with it because it brings capability faster. But thank you for the question. Good.
Questions?
Okay, sir. I'm getting a tough one now.
Yeah. Can you comment on the state of Apache pilots and what our future is in terms of overall readiness and maintaining the
Yes,
Apache fleet?
So we are short pilots, just candidly speaking. I mean, we are under our authorization for aviators, most predominantly seen in the AH-64 community. We under-assessed based on financial limitations to bring in a number of aviators that were required to meet an operational requirement from Forces Command, and that was noticed and reversed about a year and a half ago, maybe. And what we've done to reverse it, you can't fill the void with just accessions, because then 6-8 years later you would have a relatively inexperienced force. So today, 25% of the active component warrant officers are retirement eligible. In 18 months, it is 33% of the active component warrant officer aviator population retirement eligible, at a time when the airline industry has a huge pilot shortage as well, and they're highly recruiting all services to come, and we have lost some aviators, Army rotary wing aviators, to the airlines. Now, I would say, and I would honestly be remiss if I didn't say this, good. Frankly, I fly in the backs of U.S. Army aircraft all the time, and there is no better rotary wing helicopter pilot in the world than a U.S. Army aviator. So when you get on board a Delta or an American or whatever, and they say, "Hi, I'm Captain Bob, and I'm a U.S. Army aviator," you're going to have a fine flight. Don't worry about it. But we have to account for that. You got to assess enough to avoid that attrition being a problem. But you also have to keep some experience. So we gained approval to give aviation bonuses to pilots. And I think it's critical. We did it in 2 different year groups. We did mid-grade and we did seniors, 19 to 22 years of service. And some people question, hey, why would we give a 20-year Army aviator a 3-year bonus? And my answer is because if they all retire, we have no experience in our fleet. So we need them. We retained quite a few in the mid and senior grades that will enable us to get out of this experience gap potential. But we still got to bring in more aviators and train them. So our big challenge right now is because you're short, you have to, first kind of invest in the institution and ensure that you have aircraft equipment and people and instructor pilots in the institution to allow you to train and catch up. We are improving, but we still lag behind our authorizations right now. And our forecast is once you get additional manning, it's about 6 years before you totally train everybody. It took us a decade to get in this position. We can't get out of it in a year or by next Thursday. So we've got some work ahead of us. Now, as far as the impact to our young enlisted maintainers, we have gone years upon years of utilizing contract maintenance downrange in deployed locations because of force caps of numbers of people or whatever. Frankly, the impact of that atrophied skill to our maintainer has been horrendous. And we know it. We're trying to regain those maintenance skills. When you see a young staff sergeant today, those of you with gray hair, you used to know exactly what a staff sergeant knew and how many reps he had on a certain maintenance task, and you knew what their skill levels were. Today, it's not the same. We have staff sergeants that may have only performed a task one time in their career, whereas before, you look at a staff sergeant, you knew he had 100 reps or more under his belt or her belt. So Sergeant Major Greg Chambers used to be the branch sergeant major. He left and came up to D.C. He's now the nominative sergeant major. Awesome non-commissioned officer. And Sergeant Major Chambers instituted a program called the Aviation Maintenance Training Program. So basically, we're in a pilot right now, but we will track aviation maintainers exactly like we track rated aviators. So when a mechanic shows up, you see his training folder, you go, okay, how many repetitions have you had on an engine change, or you pick the component, rotor head, blades, whatever, and you can see their skill level, and then you can also develop a training plan for where they lack skills. So it gives you visibility to track and improve the quality of your maintainers. So I think it's a phenomenal thing. And Sergeant Major Brian Houck, the current Sergeant Major, picked right up where Sergeant Major Chambers left off, and he is full speed ahead, making sure this is successful. So I used to tell the captains in the career course, anytime I go talk to them, I said, now be careful. They do send generals to a school that teach you how to answer a simple question in 12 to 13 minutes. So I might have gone over my time. I apologize for that, though. Sir, did that answer the question? Sir.
Well, thanks very much, General Gayler, and we certainly appreciate your candor and your plug for the upcoming panels. I would encourage you to develop a really hard question to ask General Thurman when you're on the panel, because payback is always fair. But thanks very much, General Gayler.
Thanks, sir. Thank you.